Every day, billions of people open a browser and assume they're simply accessing the internet. They search for information, check their email, manage their finances, communicate with family, and conduct business, all through a single application sitting between them and the entire connected world. Most of those people are using Google Chrome, and most of them have never stopped to ask a question that matters more than almost any other in modern computing. What exactly does that browser know about me, and where does that information go? This isn't a question designed to generate panic. It's a question that deserves a serious, honest answer. Because browsers have evolved from simple document viewers into extraordinarily complex platforms that mediate virtually every aspect of online life. The browser you choose determines how your data is handled, how you're identified across websites, what companies know about your behavior, and ultimately, how much of your digital life remains genuinely private. Understanding those differences requires looking carefully at how Chrome became dominant, what the privacy debate actually involves, and what your alternatives genuinely offer. Chrome's rise to browser dominance is one of the most remarkable product success stories in technology history. When Google launched Chrome in 2008, Internet Explorer held commanding market share, and Firefox was the challenger browser, gaining ground among technically aware users. Chrome entered a crowded market with a clear proposition: speed, simplicity, and stability through process isolation that prevented one crashing tab from taking down the entire browser. That technical approach was genuinely innovative, and users noticed immediately. Google's distribution advantages accelerated Chrome's growth in ways that competitors couldn't match. Google Search, already the dominant search engine, began recommending Chrome to visitors using other browsers. YouTube suggested Chrome for better performance. Gmail worked best in Chrome. Android phones shipped with Chrome as the default browser. Chromebooks ran Chrome as their entire operating system. Every product in Google's ecosystem pointed toward Chrome, creating an adoption funnel that no marketing budget could replicate. By the early 2010s, Chrome had overtaken Internet Explorer and Firefox to become the world's most used browser, and its lead has only grown since. The extension ecosystem reinforced Chrome's dominance by making it genuinely more useful than competitors for many users. Developers built extensions for Chrome first because that's where the users were. Users chose Chrome because that's where the extensions were. This virtuous cycle created a library of hundreds of thousands of extensions covering every possible use case, from productivity tools to password managers to privacy utilities to developer tools. Moving away from Chrome meant potentially losing access to extensions you'd integrated into your workflow. Developer tool support gave Chrome another durable advantage. Google invested heavily in Chrome's developer tools, making them the standard reference implementation that web developers use to test websites and debug applications. When developers test primarily in Chrome, websites naturally work best in Chrome, which reinforces the case for ordinary users to use Chrome. This dynamic has been a self-reinforcing cycle that makes Chrome's market position structurally sticky in ways that go beyond simple user preference. The privacy debate around Chrome is genuine, technically substantive, and more nuanced than either Chrome's critics or defenders typically acknowledge. Understanding it requires separating different categories of data collection and tracking that often get conflated in popular discussion. Google operates a business built on advertising, and advertising depends on understanding user interests and behavior. Chrome, as a Google product used by billions of people, provides Google with data that is relevant to that business. This relationship is real and worth understanding clearly. Browser telemetry is data that Chrome sends to Google about how the browser itself is functioning. This includes crash reports, performance measurements, feature usage statistics, and diagnostic information. Chrome collects this by default, though users can opt out. The stated purpose is improving Chrome's functionality, and that's plausible. But telemetry data can include information about browsing behavior that goes beyond pure performance monitoring, and the degree to which Google uses telemetry for purposes beyond browser improvement is difficult for outside observers to verify completely. Cookie-based tracking operates differently from telemetry. When you visit websites, those sites set cookies, small files stored in your browser that allow the site to remember you on return visits. Third-party cookies, set by advertising networks rather than the sites you actually visit, enable tracking across multiple websites by allowing those networks to recognize you as the same user across different domains. This cross-site tracking is how behavioral advertising profiles get built. Chrome has historically allowed third-party cookies, while Google developed its Privacy Sandbox initiative to eventually replace them with alternative tracking mechanisms. The Privacy Sandbox deserves careful examination because Google has positioned it as a privacy improvement, while critics argue it primarily serves Google's advertising interests. The initiative proposes replacing third-party cookies with browser-based APIs that allow interest-based advertising, while keeping individual browsing data local rather than shared with advertising networks. The privacy argument is that fewer third parties would have access to your raw browsing history. The criticism is that it also consolidates advertising infrastructure within the browser, meaning within Google's product, potentially giving Google structural advantages over competitors in the advertising market. Synchronization across devices is another dimension of Chrome's data collection that users often underestimate. When you sign into Chrome with a Google account, which Google encourages prominently, your browsing history, bookmarks, passwords, open tabs, extensions, and settings sync across all your devices through Google's servers. This is genuinely useful functionality that many users rely on. But it also means your complete browsing history lives on Google's servers, associated with your identity, accessible to Google for various purposes, including understanding your interests for advertising. The convenience and the data exposure are inseparable when using Chrome's sync features. Understanding how Chrome compares to its major alternatives requires examining each browser honestly, because no alternative is perfect, and each involves different trade-offs. Microsoft Edge, now built on the same Chromium codebase as Chrome, offers full compatibility with Chrome extensions and nearly identical performance. Edge includes tracking prevention features that block third-party trackers in standard and strict modes, built-in features like collections for research organization, and a similar AI integration approach to Chrome. The privacy concern with Edge is that you're exchanging Google's data collection for Microsoft's. And Microsoft's business also involves data collection for advertising and services. Edge is a reasonable alternative for users invested in Microsoft's ecosystem. But it doesn't solve the fundamental tracking concern, it relocates it. Mozilla Firefox represents a genuinely different approach because Mozilla is a nonprofit organization without an advertising business model dependent on user data. Firefox has historically been the browser most aligned with user privacy and web standards as independent values rather than business objectives. Firefox includes strong tracking protection by default, blocks known fingerprinting scripts, provides extensive privacy settings, supports a mature extension ecosystem, and maintains its own browser engine rather than building on Chromium. Firefox's disadvantage is that its engine renders some websites slightly differently than Chromium-based browsers, and a small number of sites optimized specifically for Chrome may have minor compatibility issues. But for the vast majority of users, in the vast majority of browsing contexts, Firefox works excellently. Brave is built on Chromium, but has replaced Google's components with privacy-focused alternatives. It blocks ads and trackers by default, aggressive enough that it blocks more than most other browsers without configuration. It includes built-in fingerprinting protection, forces HTTPS connections where available, and has a Tor integration mode for high-privacy browsing. Brave's business model involves its own advertising system that shows privacy-respecting ads and shares revenue with users who opt into it, which is a genuinely different approach to the advertising relationship. Critics note that Brave is still controlled by a for-profit company with its own commercial interests, and some have raised questions about specific business decisions the company has made. But from a technical privacy standpoint, Brave's default configuration provides stronger tracking protection than Chrome's default configuration. Vivaldi targets power users who want extensive customization, offering more configuration options than any other mainstream browser. It includes built-in tracking and ad blocking, tab management features far beyond what Chrome offers, extensive keyboard shortcut customization, and a visual interface that can be adapted to almost any workflow preference. Vivaldi doesn't have the user base of Chrome or Firefox, which means some websites may have minor rendering issues. But for users who want maximum control over browser behavior and appearance, it's worth serious consideration. The choice between these browsers isn't purely about privacy in an abstract sense. It depends on what you actually value and what trade-offs you're willing to accept. Privacy-focused users who prioritize minimizing data collection about their behavior should look seriously at Firefox or Brave as alternatives to Chrome. Both provide meaningfully stronger privacy protection in their default configurations without requiring users to become security experts or sacrifice usability for most everyday browsing. Developers using Chrome for its development tools face the most significant switching cost because Chrome's developer tools remain the industry standard reference. However, Edge and Brave both include those same developer tools since they're built on Chromium, so developers can often switch to these alternatives while maintaining the tooling they depend on. Firefox has its own excellent developer tools that many developers use as a complement to Chromium-based browsers. Business users operate in environments where IT policy often determines browser choice, and compatibility with enterprise web applications frequently matters more than privacy preferences. Many enterprise web applications are designed and tested for Chrome, and switching entire organizations to alternative browsers creates support complexity. For businesses with genuine security and compliance requirements, this complexity is sometimes justified, and some organizations have moved to Firefox or Edge for regulatory compliance reasons. But individual employees within organizations typically have limited choice about browser selection. Everyday users who simply browse the web, stream video, shop online, and use social media represent the largest category of Chrome users. For these users, the case for switching is primarily about privacy values rather than technical necessity, because in terms of raw functionality, Chrome is genuinely excellent. The question for everyday users isn't whether Chrome works well, it does, but whether they're comfortable with the data relationship Chrome creates with Google. Users who are comfortable with Google's data practices in exchange for Chrome's convenience and ecosystem integration have no technical reason to switch. Users who would prefer Google, have less information about their browsing behavior, have practical alternatives available that work well enough for everyday use. The future trajectory of web browsers involves forces that will reshape the privacy debate significantly. Artificial intelligence integration is transforming browsers from passive tools that display content into active assistants that understand what you're doing and help you accomplish it. Chrome's AI features include on-page assistance, writing tools, and intelligent search integration. Edge has Copilot integration. Firefox is developing AI features aligned with its privacy principles. Brave has approached AI features with privacy-first design. The challenge is that AI assistance requires understanding your context, which creates new dimensions of data collection beyond traditional browsing telemetry. Privacy regulations are creating external pressure on browser developers and advertising ecosystems that could reshape practices more significantly than any voluntary corporate decision. The European Union's GDPR has already forced changes to how personal data is handled for European users. California's privacy laws have had similar effects. Emerging regulations in multiple jurisdictions are focusing specifically on tracking, behavioral advertising, and data brokers. These regulatory pressures have prompted browser developers to make privacy features more prominent and default, though whether regulatory compliance translates to genuine user privacy protection depends on the specific implementations. The broader question about the future of the open web involves whether browser diversity and open standards will persist against increasing platform concentration. Web standards should theoretically allow any browser to render any website correctly, maintaining an open ecosystem where browser competition is possible. But when Chrome controls a dominant market share, web developers naturally optimize for Chrome, and subtle incompatibilities can emerge that disadvantage alternative browsers. Maintaining a viable multi-browser ecosystem requires browser diversity, and browser diversity requires users who choose their browsers deliberately rather than accepting whatever ships as default. Browsers have traveled an extraordinary distance from the simple document viewers of the early web. Netscape and early Internet Explorer were genuinely simple tools that retrieved and displayed text and images with no concept of the deep integration with identity, advertising, cloud services, and platform ecosystems that characterizes modern browsers. The browser is now the primary interface through which most people experience computing. More time is spent inside browsers than in any other application category. More sensitive information passes through browsers than through any other software. This centrality makes browser choice genuinely consequential in ways that weren't true when browsers were simpler. Each time you search, each time you shop, each time you communicate, each time you research a health concern or investigate a financial decision, that activity passes through your browser. The browser observes all of it. What happens to that observation, how it's recorded, shared, analyzed, and used, depends on which browser you choose and how it's configured. That's not a reason for alarm, but it is a reason for awareness and intentional choice. The question of whether you should delete Chrome is ultimately personal rather than universal. Chrome is a technically excellent browser that provides genuine value through its performance, extensions, and ecosystem integration. It collects data as part of a Google product serving Google's advertising business, and it does so with varying degrees of transparency depending on which features you use and how closely you read privacy disclosures. Alternative browsers offer different trade-offs, some prioritizing privacy more aggressively, some offering different ecosystem integrations, some serving specific user needs better than Chrome. What matters is that this choice is made with understanding rather than inertia. Using Chrome because you've always used Chrome and never considered alternatives is a different decision than using Chrome after evaluating what it collects, how alternatives compare, and concluding that Chrome's trade-offs are acceptable for your needs. The first is passive acceptance of defaults. The second is informed choice. The same applies to switching away from Chrome. Abandoning it because of general discomfort with Google is different from switching, because you've evaluated specific privacy concerns and found alternatives that address them without unacceptable trade-offs. Modern browsers are no longer neutral tools that connect you to the internet. They are platforms with their own ecosystems, business models, and interests that shape the browsing experience in ways both visible and invisible. When you open a browser, you're not just choosing an application. You're choosing which ecosystem's perspective on the web you'll experience, which company's interests will be served by your browsing activity, and how much of your digital behavior will be observed, recorded, and utilized by parties beyond yourself. The real question isn't whether you should delete Chrome. The real question is whether you're the customer of your browser or its product, and whether you've ever genuinely chosen which one you want to be